G'day YouTube viewer, g'day bikers. A bit more of a relaxed video today because I'm in the mood for some reminiscing. I'd like to compare the new GB350 with the first road bike I bought 45 years ago, a Honda CB250N. Obviously I don't have any footage of that bike, which preceded smartphones and the internet, and I can only find one photo from 1981 of me showing it off to one of my infant nephews at the time, who was now in his mid-40s. But I do have many great memories of it, and I love how the look of the GB350 reminds me of that old but brand new at the time motorcycle, and how it makes me feel the same way when I ride it. But in saying that, there are also many differences between the two bikes. One of the major selling points on the GB350 was how closely it matches the classic Japanese road bikes of the late 70s and early 80s, including the CB250N, which I think was known as the Super Dream in the UK, where more than 70,000 were sold during its relatively short production run. Of course, the Super Dream was only one of many CB250 models over several decades. As I mentioned in my first video on buying the GB350 for riding hood to continue learning gears on, two of the things that really caught my eye were the shape of the chrome exhaust, albeit one and not two like the CB250N had, and the fuel tank, which looks similar to many of the Honda bikes from that era. Yes, the engine and sound of the two bikes are different, but the look of the machines and how they make me feel are very similar. Let's have a look at the specs to see just how different and similar they are. My CB250N was an air-cooled 249cc parallel twin 4-stroke with 3 valves per cylinder and a single overhead cam. The GB350 is an air-cooled 348cc single with 2 valves. The CB250N's top speed was 134 km per hour or 83 miles per hour, and it made 27 brake horsepower or 20 kilowatts at 10,000 RPM and 14.7 pound-feet or 19.9 Newton-meters of torque at 8,500. So it was a more revvy engine with the peak power higher up the rev range. I haven't tested it yet because I'm still running it in, but the claimed top speed of the GB350 is 125 km per hour and makes 20.8 horsepower at 5,500 RPMs and 30 Newton-meters of torque at 3,000. The CB250, as many bikes did back then, had a kickstart as well as an electric start and boasted a 6-speed transmission with the top feeling similar to an overdrive like the 5th gear does on the GB350. The front telescopic forks feel similar, as do the twin shocks at the rear from memory. Mind you, it is 40 years since I last rode the CB250, so the brain cells are a little fuzzy on that, and what I thought was similar back then may relate to how it compared to other bikes of that time, and how the GB compares to bikes of this time. Braking performance is definitely much better on the GB350 though. The CB250N had a single 273mm disc on the front, which I don't remember being very effective, and a drum brake at the rear. I recall travelling down hills on wet roads was sometimes nerve-wracking because in certain conditions it could be difficult to pull the bike up to a stop at some traffic lights and intersections. The GB350 has a twin piston caliper on a single 310mm disc at the front and a 240mm disc at the rear. I've had no trouble stopping the bike in every situation I've faced so far. I wouldn't say they are powerful, but they seem very effective for the bike. The GB350 also boasts ABS and switchable traction control for additional safety. So I can definitely say the braking spec and tech has improved significantly over the last 4 decades. The CB250N had a 19-inch wheel at the front and an 18 at the rear, just like the GB. It had a 795mm seat height and weighed in at 167 kilograms or 368 pounds, making it 14 kilograms lighter and 5mm lower than the GB with its 800mm seat height and wet weight of 181 kilograms. The fuel capacity was 14 litres on the CB250N compared to 15 on the GB, but fuel economy is something I'm still vague on and would welcome feedback in the comments below. I'm still trying to establish how frugal the GB350 is, but some say it can do up to 600 kilometres on the tank. My memory of the CB250N's consumption is very vague, but 400 kilometres seems to be the limit from the research I've done in preparation for this video. I thought the twin might fare better than the single, but that doesn't appear to be the case. I guess I'll find out the GB's range when I fill the tank and ride it until it runs out of fuel. While my memory is vague at best, I know I never got that sort of distance on the CB250. In fact, I don't recall getting much past 350 kilometres, which is why I will be amazed if the GB gets past 500. I wouldn't have thought there'd be such a dramatic difference between the two bikes, and would love to hear your experiences. The one thing I do miss having on the GB350 is dual clocks for the speedo and tacho. Fortunately, my Z900 RS makes up for that and helps me retain and re-explore the experience of looking down on dual clocks while I ride. On that, the CB250N was not the first motorcycle I bought with my own money. That was a two-stroke Suzuki TS185 trail bike, which I guess would be regarded as a dual sport these days. I had ridden mostly Honda CT90s and CT110s on the farm before that, and as a 14-year-old it was the motorcycle that really opened my eyes to what biking was all about and could be. Oh, how I miss riding two-strokes these days. Why I bring it up is the TS185, like most road-legal bikes at the time, also had dual clocks, which were the norm for most of my two-wheeled adventures in the 70s and 80s. It is only in recent years I've been riding bikes with one clock, and I'm starting to get used to it. I have my Harley-Davidson Heritage Softail Classic and Honda CMX 1100 Rebel and Suzuki DR650 to thank for that. The simplicity of the DR Dash almost takes me back to that of the CT90 and CT110. And just quickly on another note, I think if I ever decided to restore any motorcycles, it would be a CB250 and TS185 because I have such fond memories of those two from my formative motorcycling years. I would also love to restore an old CT90 with its low range optional gearing because that was amazing on low speed hill climbing. Have never experienced anything like that since. Anyway, to conclude this video before it gets too long, as you know, stats don't tell the whole story. I don't notice the GB350 feeling any heavier than the CB250N, and the riding position seems to be the same, but maybe even slightly more relaxed on the GB. On first impressions, the seat may be slightly firmer, but I think it's more comfortable. The biggest difference between the two bikes, apart from the braking, to me is the overtaking and power at higher speeds was better on the CB. I remember I did have to drop down a gear and get the revs up on long hills and when overtaking on the old 250, but not as much as I need to on the long stroke 350 despite its greater capacity. It's a loping engine compared to the higher revving twin that makes more power near the top of the rev range. The GB pulls better low down, I think, and that is where its real character and charm is. Where the two bikes are most similar is they are both really smooth and well balanced for what they are. To me, the GB with its low down torque is suited to chugging around and relaxing around town and on quieter country roads, whereas the CB250N is better for what I used it for at the time, travelling up to 200 to 300 kilometres at a time on more open, faster roads. I love the smooth sound of its twin engine, but I love the thumping sound of the 350 single even better. I love looking at the two bikes equally, and my enjoyment from riding them is similar but in different ways. They both feel great, but the GB is more like riding my Harley, and the CB was a little bit more like my four-cylinder Kawasaki to ride. It was very smooth for a twin, and its reliability was off the scale. Given I grew up on a farm and rode on heavily corrugated dirt roads at the start of every journey, it didn't have a very easy life compared to the care and love I give my bikes these days. The only dramas I ever had on the CB250N were with flat tyres, which always seemed to happen in the city for some reason. I remember once having the rear tyre go flat when beginning to cross the Sydney Harbour Bridge and trying to get to the other side to do something about it in peak hour traffic. Now that was an experience I will never forget, but can now look back on as a great motorcycling memory. I think of all the bikes today, the one that might be most similar in power and performance to the CB250N is the Suzuki V-Strom 250SX. It is a single like the GB, but makes around 26 horsepower. I need to test ride one to confirm my theory about this very affordable bike that has been selling for more than $1,000 less in Australia than the GB350 or any of the Royal Enfield 350s. I think the GB350 will be just as reliable and have an easier life than my first real road bike did. And near where I live today, there are many single-lane sealed roads that will be ideal for this relaxed and peaceful time machine that takes me back to my youth every time I sit on its comfy seat. And with that, I will say goodbye for now, and thank you for watching and supporting my small channel. If you enjoy the content and haven't done so, please subscribe, and I will look forward to you joining me on the next ride.